probably didn't teach you, but they should have, is the whole thing of dress for success. I just want to note that they didn't teach me that either. And actually, this is dress for success. Success is a relative thing. So for success at Sandia, if you want to become a director and be scorned by your peers, then you can dress nicely. But if you want to be like a researcher and a scientist and have management leave you alone and never call you into a presentation or a meeting or make you fly anywhere to do something you don't want to do, you dress like this. I'm not kidding. You can do all the interesting, come in, please. You can do all the interesting scientific stuff you want. You can do research. You can get money. Not much, you know, the pay's lousy, but you get money to support your research, and that's fun. You have a good time. You don't have to work too hard if you dress like this. But if you should come in a nice shirt and nice pants and a tie and a jacket, then they will no doubt be promoted into management, and you can forget it. So your goals in life dictate the value of the clothes you wear, and so please come to the middle. Don't sit out there. Get in here. Pack it in. There's plenty of guys that would welcome you to sit next to them. There are plenty of girls that probably welcome you to sit. It's no problem. Okay, so who am I to tell you this? This is, turns out, completely beside from what I do nowadays for a professional career, I actually have some experience in dealing with people and organizations of all sorts. I have about 25 years of, please sit in the middle, please sit in the middle. 25 years of actual work experience, and that as opposed to what most people have as work experience, which isn't actually very much work. Please come sit in here. It's all right, you can bring food as long as you share it. Mostly I've been a consultant, a professor, and a scientist through my career. At one point I ran a company with 250 employees. Please sit in the middle. This is not a request. Ran a company with 250 employees, and it was the most painful experience of my life because employees are such a pain. Really, if you ever run a business and you have employees, the overhead of employees makes it not worth it. In fact, I quit from running that company to do consulting because I didn't want to have any employees. Just sit anywhere. Everybody here is nice. Only a few of them will bite, and it'll be a nice, gentle bite. I've led a lot of project teams with 5 to 40 people. Worked as everything from a popcorn salesman at fairs and rock concerts to an executive at a multi-million-dollar firm. So, and notice where I am now. You don't always move up in the world. Please, please join us. And I've offended people at all levels. This is very important. I do not discriminate. I offend anybody, from janitors to secretaries of state, energy, and defense, all who have been rather personally affronted and in some cases caused letters to be sent from my management apologizing for my behavior. So I guess that means that if you learn from your mistakes that I'm very knowledgeable. Please join us. And the reason I'm trying to tell you all this stuff is because you need to know it in order to succeed, and nobody will teach it to you because it's a competitive world. And so why am I teaching it to you? Because I don't give a hoot. It deals with how power works, and people in power don't want you to know how power works because once you realize how it works, you realize it doesn't exist, and then they lose their power. You know, there are societies where power is something that's controlled by force. But in our society, power is controlled by perception. So if you don't perceive that people have power, then they lose it. Whereas in societies unlike ours, if you don't perceive that people have power, they kill you. Although some people here, I guess, have been killed over similar reasons. It deals with how to convince people, and your competitors would prefer that you don't learn how to be effective at convincing people. So that's the nature of it. It deals with verbal self-defense, and people attack each other. Please move to the center. This way. See? Power, you see? Position of authority. They move because they believe. In reality, you rule. A lot of people, and especially in the United States, in their speech style, please move to the center. Oh, oh, get up this way. No, this way. Come on, come on, come on. A lot of people, especially in the United States, the way we speak tends to be rather aggressive. The way our television is quite aggressive. And so people, often without knowing it, are very aggressive in their verbal communication, and knowing how to defend yourself is important to your success. And it also deals with people and groups and why they do things. And most people actually don't know why they do what they do, but there are actually reasons that people behave the way they behave. And there's in fact a basis for all this. It's based on recent scientific work in a variety of fields, psychology and physiology. Thank goodness there's separate words here, otherwise I would have been really upset. Organizational theory and practice, negotiation and elicitation theory, and practical experience in that. And it's augmented by my own experience, and as I said before, you learn best by your mistakes, so I should be really good at this. I'm going to present a slide. You listen to my long-winded explanation. You make comments and ask questions. I try to address your issues. Then I put up a scenario, and you respond to it. So we're going to have, hopefully, a two-way conversation. But otherwise, I am capable of speaking nonstop for an hour and a half, as you're well aware. So as I go through, reading various things, I read a lot of books because I like to do it and because I think it's beneficial. In fact, here, this is one of the 5 or 6 books I'm reading right now. It's called Out of Control, which is not a very particularly good book, but it's about the new biology of machines, social science, and the economic world. So, but I read a lot of books, and when I find good material in the books I read, come in, don't stand out there. Get a cookie and come in. When I read books that have interesting material, please sit in the middle. Oh, there we go. When I read books that have interesting material, what I do is I abstract the content of the book into a slide that I then hang on my wall, and I refer to that slide that's hanging on my wall whenever I'm dealing with a situation that relates to that. And in fact, on my little Palm computer, I have files that have all this information in linear form, so that if I'm in a meeting and I recognize that this is a situation where understanding something that I don't remember out of these slides would be helpful, I go look it up. They think I'm taking notes or something. I'm looking up something that says how to respond to this kind of verbal abuse. Aha. And then I use that information. It's very beneficial. So this is a slide that talks about motivation and how people are motivated. And it talks about each individual is unique, but they have needs, and then these sets of E's, and there are results that come out of that. And there are various theories on needs. McClellan has affiliation, power, and achievement, the Maslow hierarchy of self-actualization, esteem, belonging, and love, safety, and physiology, where everybody will do whatever they need for physiology. Once that's satisfied, then they'll work for safety. And once you have safety, then you work for belonging and love, and then self-esteem, and then self-actualization. And there are other such schemes, and various economic and other views on how and why people deal with that. But generally then the needs drive are driven by these E's: energy, excitement, enthusiasm, expenditure of emotion, time, money, and passion. And there are other factors like strength of the need and the expectation of fulfillment and so forth, and different modes in which you use these things, and various results that come out of those. And so this is how people are motivated, and of course by playing with these things, you can change their behavior. So if you use belonging and love as a lever against an individual, then you can be very successful at getting them to do all sorts of things. And if you understand that somebody is using this as a tool against you, then you can decide whether you want to be used in that way or not. But if you don't understand it, then you just get used and abused. We have abstracted out of this field. I have this magic slide that I keep up on my wall. This one's been up there for a long time. This talks about the cause, the emotion, and the behavior that you see. And it's just wonderful, because if you see somebody that's being inefficient, and you want to know why, you say they're being very inefficient, probably it's some anxiety related to some conflict. And you look for the conflict, and if you can cure the conflict, this is somebody that's not normally inefficient. If you cure the conflict, the anxiety will go away and they'll start to become efficient again. And similarly, so frustration produces hostility, which makes you either aggressive or apathetic. I'm a sort of person that gets aggressive, but at Sandia I learned that apathy is the solution. If there's a threat, you get fear, and there's the fight-flight response, and so forth. So any questions about this notion here and what these things are? Any thoughts? It's your turn. Communicate. Silence. Speak. Speak.
All right, you're in computers, right?
I'm not in a computer. I'm in a room.
You are. Obviously. So, dealing in a computer world, why do you feel this is necessary? I mean, granted, this is great, but like we're all scientists, we haven't seen this since high school, probably.
Oh, why is this important to you? Because the value of your scientific contribution to your success is approximately 10%. Okay, your manager in any business, your boss, people that see you out in the field and so forth, act under the presumption that you know what you're talking about from an engineering or scientific standpoint. And that's assumed. But that has nothing to do with your success. In fact, you can be reasonably incompetent in your field of endeavor and be highly successful because you understand these things I'm talking about. Whereas even better would be if you were highly qualified scientifically and knowledgeable and hardworking and also understood, why it is that I keep explaining it to them and they just don't get it. Okay, so that's also understand that besides being scientists, you're also people, and you live in a real world, and science is not everything. Yes, sir.
I feel bad about missing the very beginning, but where does this particular slide come from? Who is the Buddha of this slide?
Where does this come from? I read lots of books. All the slides you're going to see are because I read lots of books, and I make slides out of them so I can remember them and then use them when I need them. No, this is from a whole bunch. This is just shoved together from, I don't segregate particular books. At the end, I will give you a list of interesting books you might consider reading to learn more about the things I'm talking about. So anybody expected security or computers, forget it. We're not there. Someone comes to you crying, okay? Somebody shows up at your door and they're crying over something or another, okay? In a professional situation or in a personal situation. Okay, so the question is, what's the emotion here? Let's see, sorrow, thank you. Boy, you actually look. The emotion is sorrow, and there's some sort of a loss involved. So if you can address the loss, you can, or make them believe there is no loss, you may help to get rid of the cause. Another one, you're feeling a lot of anxiety at work. Anybody feel any anxiety at work ever? I feel anxiety at work all the time. Usually it's because I want to get home or something. So you're feeling anxiety at work. What's the cause? Whoops, wrong slide. I got to learn my directions better. Tell me about anxiety. What are you going to produce, and what's the cause? Okay. Hopefully we'll get to some utility. You feel threatened. What's the emotion that's going to happen when you feel threatened? Fear, thank you. And what are the likely effects? What are you going to do? Please sit in the middle with everybody else. Fight or flight, right? You're afraid, you're going to fight. So if you make somebody afraid, what's going to happen? That's right. They're going to attack you or they're going to run away. If you're in a meeting and you're too aggressive or you threaten in some way another person in that meeting, not I'm going to kill you, but maybe you threaten them scientifically because your knowledge is presented in a way that harms their program or that harms them in front of a sponsor. Fear, they're going to either hide or they're going to fight you. Maybe right there in the meeting. Okay? All right, completely different things. Persuasion mode. This is actually a wonderful stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff done on negotiations. The Karas negotiation tapes, they're sold in airline magazines all over the place. And they cost, I think they're a couple $100, but they are worth it. 20 times over, they're worth it. What they teach you about, well, let's see, the first thing that they teach you is that in this life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. Okay, it's true. Your salary, your position, what equipment you get, what jobs you take on, where you go when, who you marry, who gets to choose whether the toilet seat's up or down. This is all about negotiation. And In negotiation, persuasion is one of the key things that goes on. And it's not just in negotiation. It's any, for example, in this presentation, you may be able to track my use of this model in trying to persuade you of the value of these things, which you're obviously not fully convinced of yet. So this picture, I'm going to try and explain the picture. I don't know how I can do that. Basically, the goal here somehow is to make a change. And it's been found by a lot of studies that change comes from the combination of learning and acceptance. So if they don't understand what you're saying, they're not going to be able to change relative to it. And if they don't accept what you're saying. So it's not just that you present a wonderful scientific case, it's that you put it in a way that they can find a way to accept it, that it'll work for them. Otherwise, no matter how good it is, they're still going to go left when you want to go right. Learning comes from hearing, that not just in the verbal sense, but reading and whatever it is that gets it into your brain, and comprehending it. And acceptance comes from a combination of comfort with the message and relevance to the subject matter and the fact that they generally kind of like what you're talking about. It's a good idea, hey. So there are a variety of things that affect this. For example, the message, content, and appeal. If you present both sides, that's better than presenting only your side of a situation. If the favored viewpoint comes last, that's better for you. Right? The thing you want comes last. Court cases. Sometimes, if any of you ever watched court TV or you saw parts of the O.J. Simpson case, when they talk about juries and how to present things to juries, they talk a lot about this stuff because this is how they get juries to go one way or the other. Another one is people tend to remember what happens at the start and at the end, not in the middle. So please sit with the rest of us. So if you are ever in a meeting, one of the things you notice about a lot of meetings is all the decisions are taken at the end. So you can just sit and ignore the whole meeting, and at the end, after everybody else is exhausted and tired out, you can get what you want. Okay, now, I understand this. So when I run meetings, I make decisions every step of the way. There's little teeny mini meetings, subject, subject, subject. I write down the answer. Okay, that's what we decided, that's what we decided. Move on, move on, move on. Get to the end. And that defeats that tactic. But it's a very strong tactic, certainly in presentations. The end is remembered better than the start. You want to state your conclusions. Repetition helps. If I say the same thing again and again, Dick, please sit with everybody else. If I say the same thing again and again and again, you're going to come to comprehend it, right? If I demonstrate it to you, learning in multiple modes improves learning quality. It's helpful if you arouse a need and then fulfill it. So if you give me the answer but you don't tell me why, or you tell me why but you don't give me the answer, it doesn't do it. But if you put them together, it's much more useful. Threats are rejected. Anything that threatens the person you're trying to convince not only causes them to reject the threat, but they also reject everything else you're saying. So it's very difficult to do this, but you try to be non-threatening to people that you're actually in opposition with. The desirable message comes first. This is a very important one in negotiation. Ask for more, get more. Okay? In negotiation, the winning negotiation tactic, and you see this now in international negotiations, you don't understand why, they take this hard-line position and refuse to move from it for years. And then when they yield, okay, we'll take one guy out of one settlement. Right, we've given in a little bit. But it turns out that works. In a lot of studies of negotiation, taking your position and never yielding lowers the expectation of the other person, changes their expectation to where you're going to get what you want. And any time you give them a little bit, they feel tremendous about it. Okay, they actually feel very good that you've done some trivial thing that 2 hours ago they would have said, that's completely unacceptable and trivial. I'm not even going to talk to you about this. Now they're jumping at it and saying, oh my God, you gave me 2 cents on the $40 purchase. Oh, wonderful. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you have a stalemate. Nobody folds.
Well, that's the point of hard negotiation is that there are other factors involved. Another factor, for example, is time. Okay, one person may be under time pressure that the other one's not under. So if they're under time pressure and you're not, they can't stay hard line because either they're going to give it all up, which hurts everybody, or they're going to give in to more and more of your demands as the deadline approaches. And there are other pressures because negotiators need to negotiate with the people that they represent. And so there are things you can do. So it's more complex, but so I hope that starts to answer part of the question. But you should really read about it. Let's see, tie hard issues to easy issues. Okay, if there's some really hard thing and you can tie it to something really easy, then sometimes you can get the hard thing done by tying it to something that's easier to do. A psychological thing. You know, doesn't make sense, but it works. Don't create defensive perspectives in the other person. Don't belittle the other person's views. Very important. If you belittle their views, they feel attacked, and they're not going to yield. Try and be friendly and sympathetic. Ask for advice. Appeal to their self-worth, fairness, and excellence. Okay? And we'll get to another one that talks a little bit more about this later on. Let's see, another one that's interesting is if you're introduced as an expert, you'll be believed as one. Which is why I started my presentation as I did. See, I proved to you that I'm an expert in something I know absolutely nothing about. And now you're going to believe this crap. All right. No, actually, what I did was I told you that I read this from real experts. And so you're going to believe it transitively. I don't know. This is a good one. If you're going to be perceived as an expert, what you need to do is unless you're, this is a quote, unless you're damn sure, say, I reckon. I think it's a quote from Ben Franklin or something. Say, well, it seems to me at this time that this is the case. But not absolutely positively, you know, it's blue. Son of a gun, it turned out to be aquamarine. Oh. Seems to me right now, it looks pretty much like blue to me. I could be wrong, but it is kind of blue, isn't it? Yeah. Just works differently. Also, the media has a tendency to lend to credibility. If you do something on paper, it has more credibility than if it's on the web. Okay? Or these days, probably the web has more credibility, even though it shouldn't have any credibility, but that's another issue. He was able to put it on a web page, therefore he must be skilled and expert. I saw it on TV. It was in the newspaper. I'm black. It's true. It was in the newspaper. No. It can be completely ridiculous, but the media will lend credibility. Another one is the choice of media. Letters are good when you're trying to establish a justification or get a letter back, proof of some exchange of information, or when interpretation is dangerous. Okay, so you need to be careful about how things are interpretable. Face-to-face is better when you're presenting, when presence brings respect or regard. Okay, so if it's important that you be personally present because that's going to influence them, that's important. When visual indicators will help, right? So if I talk, I move. I can't talk without moving. I did a polygraph exam, and they say you're not allowed to move. And I couldn't say yes to your name is Fred. I just like, yes, you know. So, but sometimes that motion is not very helpful in the presentation, and so forth. So the other thing is you want to make the audience feel worthwhile, reinforce their opinions. People like to have a balance, so presenting one-sided arguments doesn't help. Ambiguity upsets people, so you want to present both sides, but make sure that it's not ambiguous. I don't know how you do that, but that's tendency to resolve ambiguity quickly. So if there's some ambiguity and you can resolve it quickly, people will rather resolve it than actually fight over it, even though it might harm them in the sense of the overall negotiation. You want to account for the audience in your facts, your methods, and your goals, and your values, and their values, and there are power issues. You may be negotiating with the wrong person. So how do we use it here? For example, how am I getting you, hopefully, to learn here? For example, how do I get you to hear what I'm saying? In my presentation, think about it. What have I done to get you, using those techniques, to get you to hear what I'm saying? Slides help a little bit. Multimedia. How about language? Right, the way I speak to you. How about that I promote a perception of being cool, which I am. How do I make sure you understand?
Ask for feedback. Great question.
What?
Ask for feedback.
Ask for feedback. Yeah. How do I make sure you understand? Probably not. Well, I'll tell you one way I make sure you understand. I use humor in a very strange way. Everybody's still sitting in the middle. Those of you that were here at the beginning, I explained to the relatively small number of people here at the beginning that power in our government, in our country, is perception. That there, in fact, through perception, I got you to move to the middle. And that's why when I said move to the middle, people were laughing. Because I explained to them that you didn't have to move to the middle. You could stay where you wanted. But because I said it and I was seemed to be in a position of authority, that power made you move to the middle. But the power just comes from the perception. And so for the rest of your lives, you're going to remember that it was the perception that caused everybody to move to the middle. And you laughed at it. So that's one of the ways that I get you to understand is by demonstration. How am I getting you to accept it? So how am I bringing comfort to you in my presentation?
Breaking down walls, like you're not administration, you're not management. You're against management like we all are too. So.
Yeah, I break down barriers. I get you comfort with it by style, by being easygoing, by repetition. Okay? I started at the beginning. I'm going to repeat it through the end. So that repetition helps to bring you to more comfort. How do I make it appealing? I try to make you laugh. You know, I talk about things that are maybe relevant to you or not, you know, and so forth. So think about the slides, the way I introduce myself as an expert, the credibility of the forum. Oh, I'm a PhD. I'm at Sandia National Laboratories. I am an expert. The appealing title, right? That was designed to make you think that there was some value here. The relationship or lack of relationship to your areas of interest. You didn't think you were interested in this, but now I want you to realize that you can actually, you know, get your science done better this way. Maybe you are a little bit interested at least. The graphics help, you know, see, I'm trying to look in detail at what's going on. So having good graphics helps. Not over graphics and not irrelevant graphics and not bizarre graphics, but good graphics that are related to the topic and make people think or laugh or remember. And of course, my speech patterns is unlike anybody else's. Okay, so I've been talking to you about power, so now I'm going to talk to you about the mechanisms that underlie power. Basically, let's see, the value of power is that it influences people. Okay, that is that it gets people to do what you want them to do. Okay, so the goal of power is to produce influence. So there are various sources and types of power. For example, there's physical power. I'm stronger than you. I'll make you sit down. There's resource power. I have $50 here if you sit down. There's power of position. I'm standing up. Actually, that's a physical thing. But I'm a staff member and you're a student, or I'm your boss and you're my employee, or I'm from the DOE and you're at Sandia National Laboratories, which seems to make people jump and spin around and do all sorts of bizarre things they would never otherwise do, even though that person who claims to have that position in the DOE doesn't actually have anything of any worth in some cases. Expertise helps. Okay. Your expertise gives you power. Your knowledge, your ability to understand things they don't understand, your ability to make better decisions based on technical details gives you power. There's personal power. Folks like me, man, we're full of charisma. Hey, we can get anything done just by smiling. All right, Bill Clinton. All right. And there's the power of emotion. I mean, these emotions we talked about cause people to behave. They force behaviors on people. So these power sources produce influence. And there are different ways that they produce influence. And these arrows and dotted lines and all that stuff sort of tells how things do what. Okay, so it says, for example, that resources can produce influence in the form of force. I have $50, you have $25, I bought it, you lose. Okay. And so there are there's overt types of influence, the force, the exchange. The exchange as an overt force is okay one time, but if you repeat the use of exchange for what you want, you know, here's $50, can I have sex? Here's $50, can I have sex? Then that produces an expectation that sex is worth $50. And when you want to get it for 25, you're going to have a hard time. Okay, so, or alternatively, when somebody says, I'm going to charge you 100, they're going to have a hard time. Rules and procedures. I mean, this is used around here all the time, right? This is, I'd love to do it, but you know, Rule 53 says I can't do this. Okay? Or I don't want to do it. I got to find a rule that says I can't do it. Okay? So I'm going to use those rules against you. And that's an overt form of force. There's the perceived right, and there's the enforcement issue. I mean, then there's just this whole notion of persuasion that we've been talking about. The weight depends on their belief in the source. So you can influence people just by convincing them that this is somehow right or good or what they want. Then there's covert. For example, you can do it ecologically in a strange sense by controlling the environment. You know, an example, turn up the temperature in a room, and it changes the dynamics of the social situation. Okay? In negotiations, there's a common tactic, I guess, used by one of the Teamsters leaders, is he'd go into the negotiation room and he'd have lots and lots of coffee and no bathrooms. And they'd be in this thing where we're in this meeting and we're not leaving this room until this issue's settled. Here, have some more coffee. It's late at night, right? Here, have some more coffee. We're going to keep, you know. Oh, okay, I agree. You know, and it works. I mean, it really works. Controlling the environment. A noisy environment is about a light, bright environment as opposed to a dim environment. Dim environments will make people go to sleep, and so forth. You know, you can sort of run things past them without them even hardly knowing it went by. And then magnetism, obviously, a fantastically high value and influence there by magnetism. People like me, you know. Then there's bridging. For example, the threat of force, which is it's covert in the sense, it's not overt, it's not forcing somebody, but there's the underlying threat that you're going to use force, unless you get what you want, which bridges these things. So you use these things, and then let's see, information is something that gives you power indirectly. The right to access and the right to organize. Okay, these they stem from position. Okay. You're a director, you have the right to hire people. You have the right to fill out this kind of form. You have the right to allocate this portion of a budget, and so forth. So things that stem from position. Information. I can get your salary information. Actually, I can't get your salary information. But some people in some positions can get your salary information. So they can verify things. They can compare you to somebody else and like that. So that information leads to the ability to use these kinds of force. The same as with right to access. I can use the executive bathroom, right? Therefore, in this negotiation, you can't use coffee on me. And the right to organize. Okay, we're going to have a reorganization here, and we're going to put all the people that objected to me over in this new organization. What's it called? What's the name of Jerry Jonas's new organization? Whatever it is. Right? So you get the idea. You can move people around organizationally to cause the power structure to change to your benefit. There are some cases where you have no choice but to comply, and that leads to resentment. There are other cases where you identify somehow with what's going on. You like the idea of the person, and it keeps recharging. So you're ready to go, and it keeps working. The other one here is internalization, which is sort of the best of all worlds. Is you convince them to take it on as their own. And the side effect is that ownership changes. You've convinced them. This is a great idea. You know, it's such a good idea. You're right. I'm going to take it on. I own it. Okay, so they're going to take it on, but they're going to start claiming rights over it. They're going to start saying, you know, I helped develop this and so forth. And so part of the deal here is that it's always more effective, it's more influential to get up to this level. But you give something up by convincing a set of people that this is such a really good idea. What you give up is, yes, you'll get the citations as the first person that ever did one of those. And they'll get all the rest of the citations because they're going to be working on it real hard. And they'll spend money and they'll claim credit. And that's good for what you want done. Your power has produced the desired influence. Okay, but it perhaps doesn't give you something else that you might also want, which is more credit, which scientists like over most other things. Another thing here is, in general, as strategies go, limiting the opponent's options and keeping your options open gives you the ability to have more influence, and therefore is something that gives you more and better power. There are other important things to know in here. For example, there are various things that translate power into influence: reason, friendliness, coalition, bargaining, assertiveness, sanctions, and higher authority, appealing to higher authority. These are sort of the tools that you use to turn power into influence. And, for example, greater position or resource power means that you have more of these strategies available to you. Okay, so if you're differentially higher in an organization, there are more of these things you can use to get what you want. Now, of course, if somebody is high up in an organization, you know they have power to get what they want, and they want something from you. You know that they have these tools available. Maybe you can decide which of those things you want them to use to convince you. All right, boss, I'll do that, but I want more money, or but I really need this thing for my lab, okay, and so forth, depending on what you want. Reason works on bosses. Other methods tend to work on subordinates. That's the common mode of operation. So you try to convince your boss, but you tell somebody that works for you. By the way, reason almost never works on your boss's boss. It's harder because you need to get your boss to use the reason on them, which means you need to get the boss to adopt it as their own. Okay. More power distance, that is higher in the organization versus lower, means that there's a tendency to fall back on assertiveness. Look, I told you to do it. Okay. Look, I'm the vice president of the site. I told you to do it. Just do it. Okay? As opposed to trying to give you an actual reason to do it. So it's a natural tendency. And in fact, reason is used the most when expectation of success is the highest. Okay, if you really think it's going to work, you try reason. If you think, he's never going to take this, then there's a tendency to use force. Just brute force. So you get things like friendliness, which benefits the person. So for different situations, there are different things you use: friendliness, reason, or assertiveness. And there are different qualities associated with those things. For example, assertiveness is used when it's going to be a benefit to the organization, but success is unlikely and your position is high. All right, so yeah, I'm not really going to be able to convince them to do this, but I know it's very likely to succeed and it's good for the organization. I'll just use force. I'll be very assertive. Reason is when it's going to benefit the organization, success is likely, and position is high. So yeah, I'm likely to convince them. And I'm high in the organization, so I'll try to convince them instead of trying to use force. And friendliness is when it benefits you, success is not likely and your position is low. So hey, I'm a scum of the earth. I'm trying to convince the vice president of something. Hey, Bill, how you doing? Good to see you. How was that boat trip last weekend? As opposed to the other direction. So let's see, power is relative to the thing that's being influenced. And balanced power is achieved in almost all influence. So there's always some sort of an exchange. What that exchange is, and it's never you're exchanging A for A. It's not. It's like blood for gold. It's not blood for blood. And power is relative to the domain of influence. And also, so there's an issue of credibility and context, and multi-threaded approaches where you're using multiple sources of power to produce a variety of different influences tends to be stronger. And if you look here, at least for me, the red things are things I don't like to do. Use charisma, force, identification, and sanctions, and magnetism. Green things are things I like to do. I like to use reason, information, and the right to organize and exchange on rare occasions, and persuasion, and ecological things, and use more strategies, and have a multi-threaded approach. Questions about this? Sorry?
Why is charisma bad?
It's not bad. It's something I don't like to use.
Why?
Because I guess I'm a person of reason. Something about my personality says that if it's something that's right to do, I should be able to convince you by other means to do it. I should be able to use intellectual power, information, and expertise to persuade you. Right? I'm not a person that likes to use force. It's a personal choice. Yes, Tim?
Opposite of that, a salesman might be more likely to use the
salespeople are far more likely to use charisma and magnetism and other, environment, speed. The probability, I just heard this on the radio, the probability of you buying clothes if you're a man is 60% if you try one item on. If you're a woman, it's 25% at clothing stores. Okay? So the goal of the salesman in the clothing store is to get a man to try it on. It's not to get a woman to try it on. Okay? So I went to a store yesterday, and I bought a new sport jacket. And the salesman is very direct. Come on in. First thing he wants to do is get you to try something on. It doesn't matter what he's going to get you to try on. It doesn't matter if it's nothing like what you want. He's got to get you to try on something because that gives him a 60% shot that you're going to buy something as a man. Done deal. Okay. Turns out I needed to buy something for Monday, so that's another issue. But he didn't know that, and he did the right thing from a salesman standpoint. But if you recognize that, if you're a man and you recognize that, you may, A, resist the temptation to try on the jacket. No, I'm just looking. Okay? Try on the jacket, and then intentionally say, nah, I'll come back later. Just to screw that salesman's sense of, it's a negotiation. You're trying to get your best. He knows he's got you 60% if he gets you to try it on, and then you've messed that up, and now he's like, oh, no. What did I do wrong? You lower his expectations and so forth. Other questions? Well, if you don't have any for me, okay. So what's your power position? These are the things you have to. And I'm going to talk about you guys in Sandia right now. Do you have any physical power at Sandia? Not a chance. I mean, they got guards, right? They got guns. I mean, no, you're physically weak here, right? And it doesn't matter how big you are. You can lift something up, but that's not going to have any influence at Sandia. Your ability to lift up things is not going to influence MIMJOHN to change the life of the students. Resources. You guys have any resources? All right, the fact is you have tremendous resources. You have a resource that's extremely valuable to Sandia. It's your wetware, right? You have this gray matter, this energy, this knowledge that you bring to bear. This is why you're here. I mean, I have like 12 or 13 students that work in my group, and they have tremendous resource capabilities for me. They allow me to do things in my program I could never do with employees, because employees cost, on average, about $80 an hour. Not that they get paid that, don't misunderstand me, but you don't have the overhead rates on you. So there's a factor of 3 just in overhead. So you have a tremendous resource in yourself. You are the resource that you have, and that's a tremendous bargaining chip. If you want to work on something different than what you're doing right now, there are other Sandians who will be interested in having your capability working for them. So that gives you power in some sense. How about the power of your position? Okay, yeah, you say, boy, my position is the least powerful of all. But there's an old saying that I have, and it's a wonderful saying for me especially. When you have nothing to lose. So what, you're going to lose $10 an hour? Hey, you can quit. If you don't like it enough, you can just leave. And it doesn't hurt you as much as it hurts them. There's another job across the street. There's jobs in Pleasanton that pay more. It's not that hard. Expertise, is that a source of power for you? Absolutely. You think you don't have much expertise, and probably compared to the person you're working for, you don't, but compared to other people they might be able to get, you have tremendous expertise. And you're building more expertise every day. Not only general expertise in your field, but expertise about the specific things that you're working on here at Sandia. So the fact that you've been here for 3 months and know how to fill out a time card, that's something that the person they get a new to replace you doesn't know. They have an investment in you. I mean, the average cost of firing an employee is 2 years' salary and overhead. Costs you 2 years' salary and overhead to fire them. That's because that's how long it's going to take you to make up for the hole you've created in the organization, to retrain the new people, to go out and find one and hire one, and all this other stuff. Okay? Your expertise in your position. How about personal power? Okay? Do you do things that make the person you work for get more credit or be more successful in their job? You do. That gives you personal power with them. You're important to the people you work for on a personal basis. Emotional. In some cases, there are emotional bonds that form, especially, teachers and students, and I'm not talking about love relationships, but You know, I've been a teacher in a university, and I still have students that come to me from what I taught 15 years ago that say, hey, you're my old professor. I'm doing this now. Wouldn't you, you know, join me in this interesting thing we're doing? Or do you know how to do one of these things? It's fantastic. The emotional things that come out of having taught somebody courses and having them come back to you in their professional career and say, you know, it was really helpful when you told me that this was more important than that in my life. That changed my life. It made a difference to me. That's a tremendous emotional boost that you get in positions of power versus higher and lower power. There are various forces in play. And if you think about those things and how to use those forces to produce influence, that's how you can use things to your advantage, to your benefit. Think about it. How can you influence your environment? Is there anything you want to get done here at Sandia to change the place you work? To make things about your situation different or better? These are the tools to get it done. Not just here, but for the rest of your career. These are the tools to get this done. Okay. People say mean things to each other. People speak loudly. They speak quickly. They don't let other people get a word in edgewise. It's terrible. Verbal abuse. So you have to learn how to defend against it, or else it's going to hit you again and again, just like physical abuse. And this amazingly complex and difficult to understand slide, if you understand it, is very meaningful. The process of defending yourself against verbal attack, I put it on one slide instead of 20 because I like to have a sheet of paper on the wall that I can refer to very quickly, random access, find what I'm looking for, and get that piece of information. If I had it on 15 slides so it's easy to teach, it would be absolutely useless to me. First thing you need to do is detect that you're under attack. Okay? A typical verbal attack technique is for example, a presupposition and a baiting and with some harsh emphasis. So I'll say, what's a good example here? Gee, you know, I do it all the time, and you know, I can't even think of anything. Let's see. A good one is, you must not care about the organization when the way you left that seminar early today. Okay? Now, what they're trying to do in this, and they say this in front of your boss, what they're trying to do is get you to respond to, you left the seminar early. Okay? And the presupposition is you don't care about the organization. So when you get that bait with harsh emphasis, and you respond to the why I left the seminar early, you lose. Even if you had the best reason in the world, you lose because the presumption up front was that you don't have the organization's interest at heart. Now, that's an example of an attack, a verbal abuse attack. So you need to, if you detect it, you need to characterize it so you can understand what they're doing. In that case, it was a presupposition. There was a baiting and an attack. And what you need to do is ignore the bait. Even you could do that. Okay, ignore the bait. Find the presupposition. You're incompetent or you don't have the organization's best interest at heart. And then transmit the it won't work and I won't play to the attacker. Okay, come back with something like this. When did you get the idea that I didn't have the organization's best interest in mind? All of a sudden, instead of, I had a good reason to leave, it becomes, when did you get that idea? About something completely different. And that tail end, I left the meeting early, falls off. It becomes part of the dust. Nobody even remembers it. And now the discussion surrounds that person's misimpression about you, that they got at some past time. So now they have to come up with a when. Or else, you know, do something else mean and then be treated badly by everybody else in the room who sees them as being disruptive. Okay, that's an example of verbal self-defense. So reacting appropriately and then following through, and that's basically, you need to make clear to the people that are doing this that it won't work. and that every time they do it, it hurts them. And eventually, they'll suffer so much pain that they'll fight flight, right? And if they openly fight, then everybody will perceive them as bad and they'll get kicked out. And if they run away, then they lose because they don't get to do any more influence. So let's see, there are a bunch of stuff to know about having conversations and interactions with people that work, that they perceive as good, and things that cause them to think that there's a fight. And the good things that come out looking good, one of them is matching, sensory matching. So if somebody says, I don't see it that way, and you say, I don't know, it doesn't taste right to me, that's a mismatch, and you're going to have friction. But if they say, yeah, I don't see it that way, and you say, gee, it looks kind of good to me, then just the matching of that looks and see, that sensory mode of vision, changes their perception of what you said, so that they tend to think of you in terms of agreeing with them. Even if you've disagreed with their actual point, you've matched their sensory mode. So the conversation is going to go more smoothly. It's not going to be a fight. It's going to be a cooperative effort. So that's the best thing you can do, and like and agree. Another one is if you just go no modes, I see it this way. And you flip into something like, I'm not sure what the logic behind that is. There's no sensory mode. There's nothing against the vision. So it's neutral. And so you get a neutral response. They won't think you were against them. They won't think. If you want to start a fight, okay, they say, I don't see it that way. And I say, if it smells like a chicken and it walks like a duck, it must be a pig. Whatever. You've mismatched modes. You're going to cause dislike, clash, and it's going to resolve more slowly. It's going to drag out the process. Okay? Now, remember in negotiations, some people have a lot of time, some people don't have much time. So just by mismatching sensory modes, I can force a portion of a meeting or a negotiation to get dragged out, running it to the end of the time period when something has to get settled, and now they'll make some rush decisions. Clever things. Satir's modes. These are different modes of conversation. There's blaming, there's placating, computing, distractive, and leveling. And the ones in purple with the stars, blaming, placating, and distractive, they create a mismatch between beliefs and expressed beliefs. That is, what they said and what they actually thought are the result. And so if you match blaming with blaming, you did it, no, you did it, no, you did it, no, you did it, what do you get? You get a fight. Okay? If you match placating, oh, yeah, you're right, boss. Oh, no, I think you're right. No, I think you're right. No, I think. Then you'll get unproductive delay. Okay? If that's what you want. If you go computing, that's where you just go completely logical. There's no blaming, no placating. According to the recent study done in New York, it was found 3-to-1 that we should use the blue instead of the red coloring. Computing. If you match computing with computing, you get slow productive delay. Yes, but the study in New Zealand showed that purple was a 7-part, and you'll eventually work your way through to it's going to be some other yellow, whatever. If you're distractive, flipping from one thing to the other, you weren't really good about that. Yeah, but I'll do what you want. Flipping between blaming and placating, then it goes helter-skelter. I mean, you just get into this wild, bizarre mismatch of things, and the conversation just goes all over the place, and you start talking about your foot hurts, and just completely different world out there. All right, and leveling, you just sort of the simple truth as you see it, and that means total honesty. Okay, and what that does is it gets the information across, but it may not work. Right? I think you're ugly too. It's honest, but it's not likely to resolve the situation. All right, so let's see. Here's another common technique. Everybody knows blah 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 blah. Okay. In other words, you mean you didn't know that? Who are you? Everybody knows that Jerry is going to get this position. Everybody knows that Bill didn't get there by his good looks. Okay. You know, and the implication is, and we all understand that. And what you're supposed to say in response to that, to take it apart, is, I'm sure that they do understand, and I appreciate it. Which is to say, well, you're right, and move on. It may not appeal to your sense of wanting to always be right, but it works. Here's another one. If you cared about this, you wouldn't do that. When did you come to think I care? Sorry, when did you come to think I don't care? You have to actually think to do this. But another one is people, in these cases, if they're making a general statement, it's always better to agree with the generality. You know, anyone who would do X should be Y, or anybody who would X is a Y. Some people, any fool could such and such, or you're not the only fool that could do this. And the proper response is, oh, I agree. If it's a general statement, it's not about you, but you feel attacked by it, but it doesn't reference you, then agree. At which point, you missed the implication that it was you or something. That's what's going on in their mind. And now they are forced to either actually come out and say something mean about you or sort of mumble to themselves, what happened? Okay, so another interest, this is Miller's laws. Assume that whoever's talking to you is telling the truth from some point of view, and figure out what they're telling the truth about. I mean, what are you talking about, right? They are coming at you mad about something. There's something they're mad about. Figure out what it is. And in fact, behavioral inconsistencies is what you see. Gee, he's acting nice, but he's doing something really mean. There's some cause. And what you need to do is figure out what the cause is and address the cause, and that'll get you out of the situation. Another one is, anything you feed will grow. Anything you suppress will fester or die. So if you match modes, if you feed blaming, it'll grow. If you don't, if you suppress blaming, you get computing or leveling when they complain, then it'll fester or die. I mean, it just, either it'll just go away or it'll just gnaw at them and gnaw at them. Isn't that fun to make it gnaw at people? So matching modes will cause them to grow. Mismatching will tend them to suppress. They'll stop blaming and they'll flip into some other mode, and you can get them out of that situation. Let's see. This last one is, if you want to avoid opposition and generate a set of assumptions, then you use this presupposition technique. You say, here's my real message, and then do something else. Then they're going to react to the something else, and the here's my real message got through loud and clear and was never defeated. There's the illusion of choice when there is none, is another good technique to use. You present a choice where all the choices favor you. Well, we could do it in blue, or we could do it in aquamarine. Where was red in there? We don't have any red today. Another thing is when you get into this harsh sort of conversational style, one of the things to do is to express it to the other person using this specific three-part message. When you say that you don't like the way I talk to you, I feel hurt because I'm trying to talk to you as nicely as I can. Okay? That's a way of expressing it, that particular phrase. When you do this, I feel that because such and such, is an effective technique for getting out of a cycle of verbal abuse. If you continue to do that, eventually the other person will break down and start to address the underlying issue is that they're doing X and they're making you feel bad. And here's why. And maybe they'll address Y, or maybe they'll stop doing X, or maybe they'll keep doing it in a meaner and meaner spirit and you leave. But that gives you, that's a very strong tool. Also, there's another thing that happens, and that is there are structural twerks. Just things that people do as a part of their style. I wave my finger like this. I notice when I tape talks that I give, I notice that there are these things that I do in the talks when there are pauses. I cannot allow a pause in discussion. I just can't do it. No hope. So I'll do a or a well, something like that. And I'll do the same thing again and again and again. And if you listen to that in a presentation or in a conversation or in a meeting, that creates difficulties. It creates inhibitors to the progress of the conversation. And it's hard to recognize without taping yourself or having somebody tell it to you. But if you can recognize these sorts of works, then that can get you out of creating cycles of abuse. Another one is avoid the constant use of blaming, placating, or distracting. So, for example, when I give a talk and I keep blaming everybody for everything, that's probably is going to cause me great positive influence, I think. If you placate continuously, then they just get mad at you. Or if you're continuously distracting them, they don't want to deal with you. Questions about the content? Is this a lot of information to absorb into your brain in this short period of time? So you have the rest of your life. Okay. So, anybody here experience any verbal attacks? Have you ever been under any verbal attacks that you now recognize from? Yes? Give me an example without naming names. Especially if it's me, don't name a name.
Parents?
Parents. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. But, you know, that's because they're frustrated as anything. Right? They've had you around for 18 years, my God.
Is constantly being interrupted considered verbal abuse if somebody doesn't listen to what you're saying and interrupts you all the time? Because it happens a lot here.
Yeah. The answer is yes. That's a technique of verbal abuse. And there are a whole bunch of issues behind this. One of them is, of course, it's inconsiderate. And I have a tendency to do it myself. And there's a thing in our society, and I'm trying to get better at it. There's a thing in our society of interruption. That is, you're perceived as knowing more, being more expert, if you put more words out than anybody else in a given conversation. It's a cultural thing. It's not true in Europe, in some places in Europe. It's certainly not true in other parts of the world, but it's true here. And there are some other places where it's true. So the people in that situation don't know it, but they're trying to demonstrate their knowledge and their expertise and their power to you by doing that. So there are a couple of things that are commonly done. One of them is to say, please don't interrupt me. That can be reasonably effective in some cases. Another one, and boy, this is one of the most disturbing ones of all, is just keep talking. It's really bizarre. If you've ever been in a conversation and both parties just keep talking. Okay. And at some point, you know, it comes to where neither one understood what the other said, and both have to stop. And that forces an exchange. Now, there are cases when, you know, you're working for somebody, and they're doing this, or somebody has a lot of expertise, and you're trying to get that from them, and they have a tendency to do that, and you may not want to offend them. And that's a decision you have to make. But there are a variety of ways to influence them into stopping that. And no, I don't have many more specific techniques for you, but is that helpful or just useless?
You know, like...
You can. There are things you can do to your manager, okay? Well, see, one thing you can do with your manager is you can probably talk to one of the people that runs the student internship program about it, and whereas they won't do anything to your manager, and certainly they'll agree not to reveal your name, they may be able to help you in subtle and indirect ways, okay? When you can't use direct force, then you need to use an indirect approach, okay? Put them in a situation where their interruption will be seen negatively to people they care about, okay? Try to create situations, not very nice, try to create a situation where when they interrupt you, they miss the not part of the phrase, right? So you're saying, you know, I think that blue interruption. And what you're going to say would be a poor choice. They thought you were going to say it was going to be a good choice. They assume, they run forward. When they're done running forward, then you make the rest of their conversation absolutely useless by saying, yes, I was going to say I think that blue would be a poor choice. You know, and they've interrupted you when they thought you were going to say blue would be a good choice, and they ran forward with all this stuff about why it'd be a bad choice. And then you say, well, gee, I thought it was going to be a bad choice, but here's the reason I had. And then they feel really stupid. Okay? And so that's another, not very nice. You know, you may not want your boss to think that you make them feel stupid. So you maybe get somebody else to do that. That's another thing. Get into situations where there are third parties, and the third parties understand, and after they've interrupted you, the third party is going to say, I'd like to hear what she had to say. See, and then yours gets to come out anyway, and it's embarrassing. Right? So, Dick.
Gender issues on this interrupting and two people talking at the same time. I think it seems to me that the females, that's a more normal mode of conversation than with men.
That's politically incorrect.
Pardon?
I also tend to think that men are more overbearing in speech and won't let women speak up in conversation.
There are a lot of cultural factors that have to do with how men and women interact, okay? There are also other factors in the relationship between men and women, even in a work situation, which is never purely non-social except in the rarest of circumstances. Yeah, I was confusing. Okay. Professional conversation, two professionals talking to each other. Man and man, woman and woman can be purely professional, but man and woman often has a difficulty being purely professional. There are physiological reasons dealing with pheromones, for example, but no, I'm serious. There are, in fact, physiological differences and biochemical signals that go between men and women that are different than what goes between men and men. All right? But in fact, there are also lots of social drivers. There's, the influence of television and books and day-to-day life, and an argument he had with his wife yesterday. Okay? All are things that cause those interactions to be different. So you need to be aware of it. That doesn't mean you can't have a purely professional conversation. It just means that you need to keep it on that level, consciously.
I don't know how we got onto this, but that when there are conversations, like I was thinking department meetings, sometimes male people have a tendency to talk more and longer than female people.
Yes, group meetings are different than individual pairings, right? So I was talking about individual pairings, sorry. Yes, in a group meeting, all sorts of things are in play, right? There's the fact that the manager thinks, some managers are, everybody's different, but some managers think that in a meeting they're in charge. So they need to talk 50% of the time or else it's not their meeting. Other people think that they're going to, Shanghai a part of the meeting because they have something important they want to get done or something they're mad about or whatever. So there are all sorts of these social things that go on. Also, culturally, a lot of women have been brought up to be less verbally aggressive. So in that meeting room, especially with older women as opposed to younger women, which in our society are being taught differently and experiencing life very differently. Older women in the United States and also women from particular cultures, Japanese cultural backgrounds, for example, will be relatively quiet in meetings. I'm Jewish. Jewish women will not be quiet in meetings. Not a chance, right? They'll be fighting it out. So a lot of this is cultural. That also, of course, doesn't mean that you can't have just as much influence without shoving all those words out. There are plenty of guys, like a guy named Tim that works here, and Tim prides himself secretly on never speaking in a meeting unless he absolutely has to, and then saying the minimum words, until it gets to the decision point in the meeting, and then he'll push all his influence then. It's a technique he learned in England, which has a very different cultural way of dealing with those things than typically in the United States. Also, it's different in areas of the United States. So if you're from the Northeast, it's different from the Southwest. And if you're from Albuquerque, it's very different than from San Francisco, which is different from everywhere else in the world. So does that help in any sense to understand it better? Or, being as I'm an expert, right? I know nothing about the subject. Take everything I say with the level of expertise I have in the subject matter in mind. Think about these issues. So, if you do nothing else, if you take nothing else out of here, take out the notion that you want to prove by facts that I don't know anything I'm talking about here. And go read Alex Karras, which is available, the Karras negotiating course is available in the airline magazines. He has several books he wrote. He did his PhD. He's the first person to do a PhD on negotiations. And he did lots of experiments. And his books and his tapes describe these experiments he did in negotiations, where people with no power, for example, got more out of a negotiation than the person that they were negotiating with that had all the power in the world. And for reasons that in this particular example, that the powerful person doesn't like to use force against the powerless person, feels as if they have to give them something because they're powerless. Yes, there's power in powerlessness. It's amazing. There are various books on emotional intelligence, and there's one called Emotional Intelligence, which is probably very important to read in terms of understanding. Let's see. Actually, there's a tendency, and this is obviously my personal view, that women seem to understand emotional intelligence issues better than men in our society, and that just shows how bad off I am, right? But the fact is, if you look at what breeds success in organizations comes like 80% from emotional intelligence, that is understanding how the emotions of the situation work, understanding what motivates people. And the rest of it comes from you actually know or can do something. So this is very important to understand the way this works. Another book is, if you want to understand how and why organizations organize the way they do, there's a book that I read that I kind of like by Charles Handy. And I'm not anything close to understanding this field, but this book is widely regarded as a strong book in the field. Also has a lot of citations to other people's works. It's called Understanding Organizations, and it might be very worthwhile. And then the stuff on verbal self-defense, actually, my knowledge of it came largely from a tape that I found in Borders' books called The Gentle Art of Verbal Self-Defense. And I couldn't find the tape to cite the name of the woman who recorded the tape. And I just want to say that when I listened to this tape, it started out, it was just terribly difficult to listen to because she was intentionally using no inflections in her voice when she spoke on this tape to try to explain things to you. And it's incredibly difficult to listen, as it must be unbelievably difficult to speak with no inflections on anything you say. But as I got through it, I came increasingly to understand what she was doing and why she was doing it. And so I think this is, if you go out and get this tape, it's 8, 10, 15 bucks, something like that. Listen to it on the car on a trip down to Los Angeles and back. So it's a wonderful tape, and I think very useful. And I want to thank you for coming here. And if there's anything interesting you have to say, I would love to hear it. Hearing none, have a great time.